A woman stands in light so bright it hurts to imagine. Jeweled robes, gold chains at her wrists, gold chains at her neck, so heavy that 2 Roman guards walk beside her, bearing the weight. She does not cry, she does not beg. Around her, thousands of voices, a language she understands, a language she refuses to speak. She has been walking for 3 hours. She will walk for 4 more. The procession stretches ahead. Caged lions from Africa, chained soldiers still bleeding from battle, painted replicas of cities burning, all of it moving slowly through streets lined with Romans, who came to see exactly this. Behind her, silence, the space reserved for those who won't see sunset. Look at her again, the jewels catching Mediterranean sun, the robes still royal, the chains still gold. Why is she wearing jewels to her execution? Why aren't they killing her? This is the moment history remembers. Captured queen, Roman triumph, public humiliation. But what do you think happened here? Didn't happen at all. Or worse, it did, but for reasons no one wants to admit. To understand what Rome did to queens, you have to first understand what queens weren't allowed to be. If documented history still matters to you, stay close. Because what's coming isn't what you've been taught. Her feet are bleeding. She doesn't look down. 272 CE, Queen Zenobia of Palmyra. While Rome tore itself apart in civil war, she carved out an empire, Egypt to Anatolia. Legions couldn't stop her because legions were busy killing each other for the throne. But civil wars end. When Emperor Aurelian finally turned east, her forces crumbled. She fled toward Persia with what remained of her army. They caught her at the Euphrates River. She didn't resist. There was nowhere left to run. Captured enemies were paraded through Rome in triumphs, public celebrations of victory. Defeated kings displayed in chains, then executed in the Tullianum prison, the stone chamber built into the Capitoline Hill, where Rome's most dangerous enemies were strangled or starved. This had been tradition for 5 centuries. Zenobia would walk through Rome in golden chains. Then she would die. That's the story, except at the Historia Augusta, a collection of imperial biographies written 40 years after her capture, claims she was adorned with jewels that caught sunlight. Why waste expensive display on someone about to die? Every ancient account mentions one specific detail. She maintained remarkable composure throughout the ordeal. Why does every witness emphasize her dignity? What were they watching for? Aurelian captured Zenobia in 272 CE. He didn't parade her through Rome until 274 CE. 2 years. Standard practice was immediate display. Vercingetorix walked in Caesar's triumph within months of his capture. Jugurtha was paraded the same year he surrendered. What took 2 years? Most accounts end here. They tell you she walked through Rome in chains. They tell you crowds jeered. They call it humiliation. They don't tell you what humiliation actually meant, or why it required 2 years of preparation. Most people stop listening here. That's why history keeps lying. Subscribe to Crimson Historians if you haven't already. Now brace yourself for the brutal truth that comes next. The golden chains weren't symbolic, they were functional. Here's what we know about Roman law regarding war captives. The principle was called ius gentium, the law of nations. It stated simply, military defeat transforms free people into property. Once a city fell, once an army surrendered, its inhabitants became legally enslaved. Regardless of former status, regardless of gender, a defeated queen had no more legal standing than a defeated soldier. Actually, she had less. Roman law protected citizens from certain punishments. To flog a Roman citizen was scandalous. To execute one without trial sparked outrage. But foreign captives held no such protections. They could be displayed, sold, killed at the discretion of their captors. The 12 Tables, Rome's earliest legal code from the 5th century BCE, made this explicit. Prisoners taken in war became property of the Roman state. So, if captive queens were property, slaves by legal definition, Why did Rome treat them differently than other slaves? After Cleopatra's death, her daughter Cleopatra Selene was taken to Rome as a child. She wasn't executed, she wasn't enslaved in the traditional sense. She was married to a client king, sent to rule Mauritania. Why would Rome legitimize the bloodline of an enemy they'd just annihilated? Why give royal authority back to someone whose mother had tried to destroy the Republic? 60 CE, Britain. When King Prasutagus of the Iceni died, he left a will splitting his territory between his daughters and Emperor Nero, a compromise meant to preserve independence while satisfying Rome. Roman officials ignored it, seized everything, declared the kingdom forfeit. Queen Boudica protested. They flogged her publicly, in front of her people. Her daughters, likely teenagers, certainly unmarried, were violated by Roman soldiers, also publicly, also in front of their people. Tacitus records this with what he calls unusual directness for such matters. He emphasizes that even Romans found it disturbing. The problem is this: Roman law allowed it. Roman military culture normalized it. Captured women were considered spoils of war. This wasn't controversial. So why did Tacitus feel compelled to note that even Romans were shocked? What line had been crossed? The Romans weren't mindless brutes. They built legal systems that survived millennia. They wrote philosophy about virtue, justice, honor. They understood dignity. So when they stripped a queen naked and flogged her while her people watched, they knew exactly what they were doing. They weren't punishing her. They were answering a question: the triumphs, the public displays, the careful choreography of captured royalty walking through Roman streets in chains. They weren't about showing conquered enemies. They were about proving something Rome needed conquered people to believe. To understand what, you need to see what came before the triumphs. What happened in the months, sometimes years, between capture and parade. Captive queens underwent a process Roman records barely mention. Between capture and triumph, they weren't held in prisons. They were held in preparation. The Historia Augusta mentions Zenobia was so debilitated by captivity that guards had to support her during the procession. Not from torture, the jewels and robes were intact. Her body showed no marks from deliberate physical weakening. Controlled starvation, just enough food to survive, not enough to maintain strength. The amount was calculated. Roman military doctors understood nutrition. They knew exactly how much grain, how much water, how much protein kept a body alive while ensuring progressive muscle loss. The rations were delivered on irregular schedules, sometimes twice a day, sometimes once every 2 days. The unpredictability prevented the body from adjusting to a routine. Sleep deprivation through constant noise and irregular schedules. Guards changed watch with maximum disruption. Doors slammed at random intervals. Conversations held deliberately near her cell at odd hours. Torches replaced at midnight when darkness would have finally allowed rest. The cell was never completely dark, never completely quiet, never completely predictable. Isolation alternating with forced interaction. Days of complete silence where no one spoke to her, no one acknowledged her presence. She was fed through a slot in the door like an animal, left alone with nothing but her thoughts and the growing weakness in her limbs. Then sudden interrogations, questions about Palmyra's treasury, about her generals, about her son's whereabouts. Questions she'd already answered. Questions that had no purpose except to force her to speak, to engage, to remember she was still human enough to be questioned. Then silence again. Not enough to damage the body visibly, just enough to ensure she couldn't stand without assistance. Just enough that when the day came for her to walk through Rome, she would need Roman hands to hold her upright. The symbolism was intentional. She would walk in her own power, or rather, she would try to walk in her own power and fail, and Rome would be there to catch her. But there was something else in the preparation process that sources mention only in passing. Captive royalty were required to watch. Watch what? Other prisoners being executed, gladiatorial games, public punishments in the arena. Cassius Dio mentions this detail when describing the captives from Decebalus's Dacian Wars. They were brought to Rome months before Trajan's triumph. During that time, they were regularly taken to the Colosseum, not to fight, to observe. They watched criminals thrown to animals. They watched gladiators kill each other. They watched prisoners of war from earlier campaigns executed in elaborate staged battles, reenactments of Rome's victories, performed by men about to die. They sat in special sections, guarded, visible to the crowd. The audience could see them watching, could see their reactions. Why? To ensure they understood what mercy looked like. When Zenobia walked through Rome in golden chains, weak enough to need support, she'd already spent months watching what happened to captives Rome didn't consider valuable enough to preserve. She'd seen men torn apart by dogs. She'd seen gladiators bleed out in the sand while crowds cheered. She'd seen prisoners of war, men who'd once been soldiers, who'd once fought for their kingdoms, reduced to entertainment. She'd seen what execution looked like. She knew what she'd been spared, and everyone watching her knew she knew. Before triumphs, captive royalty were bathed, dressed in their own royal regalia, given their jewelry back. The preparation for this was elaborate. Ancient sources mention that Zenobia's robes were repaired where campaign dirt had damaged them. Her jewels were cleaned, professional jewelers brought in to restore their shine. Her hair was arranged in the Palmyrene royal style. Every detail mattered. Every element of her appearance had to be perfect. Not mercy, contrast. The message wasn't look at our captive, it was look at what power looks like when it can't protect you.